SIL pulls cruel prank triggering my past trauma, I lash out, and family cuts her off. Now she's playing the victim and trying to turn them against me. I, 27F, have been with my husband Aaron, 27M, for 3 years and we've known each other for 6. He has an older sister Sophie, 30F, and that's who's caused this entire commotion in the family that I'm going to talk about. So 3 weeks ago, Sophie asked me if I'd be willing to accompany her on an all-women family holiday to Spain with her, my mother-in-law, and my husband's cousin Nadia, 27F. Nadia and Aaron are a lot closer than he and Sophie in spite of being first cousins as opposed to biological siblings because they were in the same grade and went to the same high school, so as a result, I'm a lot closer to Nadia as well. Initially, I wasn't too inclined to go on a family vacation because I didn't think it'd be that fun with Sophie and my mill, but afterward, Nadia and I had a chat and she told me that she wanted a break, so she was willing to go and wanted me to come along too. She convinced me and I agreed to go on the trip. Sophie was the one sponsoring the flight tickets and the stay at the hotel, which wasn't a problem for her whatsoever because she was filthy rich. Thanks to her husband, who is a neurosurgeon. She runs an event management company, but everyone knows that the company pretty much runs itself. She just doesn't want to come off as a socialite who doesn't work. She has a degree in literature, but she's never used it and believes that college had been a total waste of time for her, except for the part where she met her current husband through a friend of hers at a party. Aaron has told me that Sophie has been spoiled rotten by her parents ever since childhood, and whatever she wanted, she got. That has extended into adulthood, and even now, she thinks that just sulking, pouting, and the silent treatment will be enough to manipulate people into doing what she wants. It doesn't help that her husband and her parents still encourage such infantile behavior, but Aaron Nadia, and I know when to ask her to cut the crap so she doesn't try to behave the same way with us. If I'm being honest, I've never particularly liked Sophie, but since she's never been outright mean to me, I've put up with her for the sake of the family. Anyway, I agreed to go on that trip with her, and 3 days back, we were finally about to leave. The airport is kind of far away from my house, so I had to leave early, and I ended up reaching there about half an hour early as well. I was pretty bored while waiting for the rest of the party to arrive, so I decided to go scroll through my phone instead. That morning itself, unfortunately, my phone's vibration motor stopped working, and so it wasn't buzzing whenever I received a notification like it usually does. I didn't have the time to repair it that day, so I decided I'd do it once I returned from the holiday. It was purely by luck that I had been on my phone when I received the message. I received an image from Sophie where she'd sent me the screenshot of text she'd received from a number I didn't recognize. The conversation had an image followed by a text, and once I downloaded it, I opened the image to check out the contents because it felt bizarre that Sophie was sending me the screenshot of someone else's conversation. As soon as I did, my blood froze because the picture had been clicked right outside of my house by someone who had a pair of scissors in their left hand. Within seconds, I received another message from the same number: "Tell your darling brother's wife that I'm back." Sophie followed that screenshot up by saying that she'd received this text from an unknown number a couple of minutes ago, and that she was terrified because she thought Aaron was in danger now. That was all I needed to go into panic mode because I actually have a history of being stalked, and it was literally the single most terrifying phase of my life. Back when I was in college, I had a stalker who would randomly click pictures of me from the back and send them to me throughout the day. He wouldn't text me on my number but would use dummy social media accounts to talk to me. He'd ask me to meet him at certain spots, but he'd never show up. I wouldn't go unarmed and I was trained in jiu-jitsu, but even then I felt very afraid of what would happen. This went on for 2 whole months and I didn't tell anyone because I was scared of what he might do if I did. Initially, I tried to get the guy to stop, but he'd texted me and told me that if I breathed even a word of this to anyone, then I'd be in big trouble, and had even sent me a similar picture from right outside my parents' house to threaten me, scissors and all. I was terrified, so I didn't tell anyone and just kept silently praying for my safety whenever I'd have to attend classes. After the first few weeks, I stopped leaving my dorm room for anything but classes and food, and eventually, it got to a point where I refused to leave my room at all because I kept receiving pictures of myself so frequently. It was then that my roommate finally realized that something was wrong and forced me to tell her, and after that, we went to the police to report this. Within a few days, an arrest had been made, and very ironically, it happened to be a guy from the computer engineering department. He was a senior and had a history of making girls on campus feel creeped out or harassed. Unfortunately, he'd taken a liking to me, and so he'd started stalking me, and because he specialized in cyber safety, he was able to find out a lot about me from my social media accounts, which happened to be public at the time. He'd also simultaneously been stalking another girl who hadn't reported this for the same reasons as me. Once he was caught, he was kicked out of college, and that was the end of him terrorizing me and other women. From what I heard, his parents took him back after a couple of days and he ended up back in his home country. It's been several years since that, and I had almost forgotten about him, but as soon as I saw that image, all the terror came rushing back and I instantly called 911. I told Sophie to get to my house ASAP, but luckily, forgot to mention that I'd called the cops already because I was more concerned about trying to warn Aaron instead. I got a cab within minutes and started trying to call my husband desperately because I knew that he was still asleep. It was 8 in the morning at the time, and my husband has a tendency to sleep late on the weekends, so I knew it wouldn't be easy for me to get through to him, but luckily, he did answer me when I called him for a third time. I could tell that he'd just woken up because he sounded drowsy, but I didn't have time to spare, so I told him to arm himself with something heavy, lock himself in the bedroom, and block the door somehow. He was confused, but as soon as I mentioned the picture, he told me he understood and did as I told him. I stayed on call with him throughout the 45-minute cab ride home, even as the cops arrived and inspected the house. I did not check my phone in the meantime, and since the vibration feature was gone, I wasn't getting any physical reminders from the notifications to remind me either. By the time I reached home, their inspection was almost over, and they hadn't found anyone suspicious in the vicinity. I was having a full-blown panic attack by the time I reached home, and it took me several minutes and half a bottle of water to finally calm down. The cops told me that they'd run the phone number through the system, and the only name that had come up was Theo Wilson. That wasn't my stalker's name, but a fake name for his phone number would be totally feasible. By then, I'd forgotten about Sophie in my phone and hadn't checked it in a while because I was just so relieved to see that Aaron was safe. The cops who'd come to my house informed me that they'd sent 2 cops separately to pay this person after the cybercrime department had tracked the sender and were currently bringing them to the police station. Aaron and I headed over to the nearest police station, and within a few minutes of our arrival, Sophie was dragged in by 2 cops while she sobbed violently. I think most people have been able to guess what happened by now, and yeah, it's exactly what you guys think. For whatever reason, Sophie had thought that it would be a good idea to pull a prank on me this morning, just to mess with me a little before our trip. She'd met a friend of mine from college for work a couple of days back, and of course, I'd come up while they were discussing families, and once they discovered the connection, my old college mate told her all about my stalker in college, which was something I'd become very popular for. I'm not bragging, but after the stalker incident, my popularity among the students and teachers alike had pretty much skyrocketed because everyone likes a good scandal. I never thought it was fun to be pointed at and whispered about, but people had remembered, and I guess we're still talking about it. After finding out about my past stalker, Sophie had decided that she was going to prank me on the morning of our flight, and it'd be fun. So she'd used a phone number that she'd taken up a couple of days ago, under a fake name, just for this purpose to text herself an image that she'd clicked a few days ago, right in front of our house, with the scissors and an outstretched arm. Of course, now that I paid attention to the hand that I saw in the photo, I could tell it wasn't a man's hand at all, but she'd made the effort to remove her nail paint. So when I received that picture the first time, it was hard for me to tell while being so panic-stricken at the very idea. The fear had messed with my mind, and I'd missed a lot of important things that hinted at this being a prank, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. It had been a traumatic thing for me back in college, and the thought of going through that again really scared me, especially when Aaron and his safety were at risk. It wasn't fun at all, and ended with an embarrassing visit to the police station where she was let off with a warning, and Aaron and I ended up wasting our time, energy worrying about the return of my stalker when we had nothing to worry about. I was beyond angry when I left the station and just let her have it. I must have screamed at her for more than 15 minutes, and by the time I was done, she was bawling again, but I didn't care. She'd tried to make a mockery out of something that was a really traumatic and scary experience for me, and because of her own stupidity, she'd landed us all in an embarrassing situation. So she could cry her tears all she wanted, but I wasn't going to feel even an iota of sympathy for her. Aaron and I drove back home that day, and on the ride back home, I told Nadia all about what happened, and even she ended up canceling the trip, because let's be real, nobody wants to hang out with someone like Sophie after they go above and beyond in their stupidity. That entire day, I did nothing but try to calm my nerves because it had been a crazy morning and I still hadn't gotten over the stalker scare. The threat, it felt very real at the time, and even after finding out it wasn't real, it was very difficult for me to shake off the fear, because it had been the darkest time for me when it happened back in college, and I'll admit, I was still pretty spooked by it. That day, I didn't talk to anyone apart from Aaron and a little to Nadia. I didn't get any notifications either because I'd turned my phone off for the day. I'd had enough. It was only 2 days ago that I found out that my mail and Sophie had pretty much filled my entire inbox with their messages regarding how I had been the one to overreact at a silly little prank, and that it had been cruel of me to tell Nadia to back out of the vacation as well. I hadn't even told Nadia to not go on the trip. I just told her about what Sophie had done.